Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today we are sitting down with a repeat guest, Duncan Pile. If you've been around the podcast for a little while, you might remember back in, I think it was November, we had Duncan on the show with 4 other people talking about their contributions to the book, Sitting in the Shade of Another Tree. And Duncan had a lot of interesting things to share, tapped me on the shoulder about maybe going down some other rabbit holes together. And so here we are. Duncan, welcome back, and thanks for making time for us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I know last time you gave us a really brief introduction because we had 4 other people who were trying to share a little bit about themselves as well. So maybe for our
Yeah.
listeners, just give us a refresher, remind us who you are, what you do, general things that we need to know about Duncan.
Okay. Well, I'm a writer,
Hmm.
and I write novels, but I also write on Patheos, which is an interfaith discussion site. My background is the Brethren, so a very strict, conservative, evangelical kind of church. I became a missionary when I was a young man after university, traveled the world, had some crazy experiences and some dreadful experiences. And I've always been a thinker. I've never been someone to sort of just accept things that are given to me. And over the years, I've unpacked a lot of the package of beliefs that was given to me as a young man. The package I inherited and was told was indivisible.
Yeah.
So as a thinking person, I've unpicked a lot of things and reconstructed a lot of things, helped a load of folk along the way, so that I'm not in any kind of formal ministry or anything like that. I'm a normal guy.
Normal guy. And you live in the UK.
That's correct. I should have said that. I'm married. I have a fantastic stepson who's a great footballer and a lovely dog who ate my new microphone last night.
Yes, you got a brand new microphone to talk today, and the dog ate it. The dog ate his homework. Likely excuse, Duncan. So our topic for today, we're going to talk a little bit about deconstruction. And I don't have, much of an agenda, no big point to make or to explore, but I was most interested because you touched on it when we had our larger roundtable with the other guests, but I'm interested to hear your story of deconstruction and maybe some of the things that you learned about your faith and about deconstruction, along the way. Like where were you in your faith? Where are you now? Some of the ups and downs of getting from there to here. Then we'll maybe see what sorts of directions the spirit might lead us. So that said, take us into it as much detail or little detail as you want. Tell us the story of your faith journey.
Well, that's a wonderful set of permissions. We don't have time to do all of that. Okay, so I was thinking about this just last night because I think very often with deconstruction, it seems to start around the point where people question the inerrancy of Scripture or the doctrine of hell, the doctrine of hell. But actually, it really starts, if you're a thinking person and you're an authentic person, it starts from the beginning. So, for example, I mentioned this package of beliefs. So one of the elements of that package that was given to me as a young man was that I had to say a sinner's prayer to start my relationship with God. I had to include the moving parts of that. I'm a sinner. Come and live in me, be my Lord, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen for me. Actually, I had a mystical experience, and this is something we've touched on before as well. I'm very much a mystical believer. My faith is mystical, which means I lean very heavily on experience of the divine, the mystical side of life. That's really the core and the heart of my faith. But I wasn't brought up that way. I was brought up in this kind of strict conservative environment where they didn't really believe you could have mystical encounters with God. Anyway, at the age of 10, which might sound like young, but it was very vivid to me, I had an encounter. I was suddenly conscious of the love of God, the power of God all around me in a way that I couldn't deny. And I just said, I'm yours. And I have been ever since. It was a real moment for me that changed my life. Now, I defined it as becoming a Christian. I told my dad about it, and he was worried I'd done it wrong. So he led me in a prayer. I remember sitting in the car with him thinking, I don't need this. But I did it out of respect. He was just doing his best, wasn't he? But I didn't need it. I'd already started that journey. So from the very first step, I was deconstructing. I was taking a bit of dogma I'd been given, and I was doing it an organic way. So a lot of my experience, whilst still considering myself an evangelical, was like that. It was sort of mystical experiences that made me realize, yeah, God's not like that.
Yeah.
Such as when, and because I related to God, you know, in his presence. And then someone tells me God does this and God does that. I'm thinking, nah, that can't be right. So, for example, my younger brother's best friend died tragically in a car accident. He was cycling and he got knocked over and died. And his parents stood up in church and said, God has taken our son. And my heart just rebelled and just said, no, God doesn't take your children. Like it broke my heart to hear them say that. And again, it was the mystical knowledge of God that allowed me to deconstruct what was really ubiquitous in our church. We didn't really acknowledge that Jesus was a healer. And again, I'm not doing the health and wealth thing. I'm just saying the nature of God is as a healer. And when Jesus met the 10 lepers, he didn't go, okay, I'll heal your leprosy. You can keep yours because you're learning something from it. And you can learn more, so here's cancer on top. You know, Jesus doesn't dole out sickness as if he's obsessed with our development. It's a really peculiar, unloving version of God that I was sold. So again, all that deconstruction happened within the confines of the evangelical world as a missionary, and when I came back for several years. But the time that I moved into deconstruction that other people would recognize more easily, it was around the doctrine of hell. And I just started to react to it. I don't know how I'd lived with it for 25 years without questioning it.
Right.
Same
here.
Yeah. I mean, was I not thinking? That's correct. I wasn't thinking.
Yeah.
I remember a young guy died at school when he ran away from school and got knocked down in the road. And a Jewish friend of mine said, so you believe that guy is now in hell because he wasn't a Christian? And I just went, yeah. But I wasn't thinking for 25 years. And it's a crime that the Christians are taught not to think, you know, accept the package, accept the dogma. And you never divide it up, never analyze it. Anyway, but when I reached the point of questioning hell, I realized I was on the point of questioning the Bible. Previous to that, I'd just been arguing about how to interpret the Bible. When I got to the doctrine of hell, I was like, well, now I'm asking a question that...
Once you pull on that hell thread, a lot of other stuff starts to unravel.
and never stops traveling, really. And the problem for me was, as a sensitive person with mental fragilities, I couldn't bear the thought of hell. Suddenly, the thought of it sent me into a panic. The idea that of one person being there and the rest of us having a party was just insufferable. How could that be the case? How could we be so unloving? The idea that, and then I thought, hold on, what's the good news? Is it good news that most people who have ever lived will burn forever? Like the worst news I've ever heard. Absolutely dreadful, the terrible news of the gospel as it was given to me.
It's good news for a few people, but really bad news for the majority.
Yeah, and if you are a person who cares about other people, you can't be in the small group.
Not
good news for you. Unless We care about you.
That's right.
You know, it's crazy, really. I don't know how parents can see, children can see their parents pass away, or parents see their children pass away tragically, and then live their whole lives thinking, well, my child might be burning, or my parent might be burning. It's insufferable.
Yeah.
And it became insufferable for me.
Yeah.
But I was a good evangelical, and I went to a healing retreat to deal with my problem.
You just gotta have more faith, Duncan. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. But they all said they had the same problem.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
that was a bit of a wake up. So
Mm.
that was the big first step, was thinking, well, that can't be right. I'm going to have to step away from that.
Yeah.
Led to probably 4 or 5 more years of questioning until I decided, I felt like my faith, I was about to lose my faith or something. I didn't feel good, felt inauthentic.
Mm-hmm.
I came across a Bible school in the States, believe it or not, in Alabama,
Mm.
which was a radical progressive school in Huntsville. I mean, there were some weird things about it, but there were some
Yeah.
really good things about it too.
Mm.
And I went there and I learned how to meditate. I learned about behavioral profiling, how to communicate. I learned about herbalism and acupuncture, as
Mm.
well as studying Greek and Hebrew and the rest of it. And at that point, I reached the base where I said, I'm going to ask the big question: do I believe in God anymore?
Mm.
And I had to be willing for any answer. So I chose whatever comes back, I'm going with it.
Mm.
So I sort of asked myself that question, and over the course of, I don't know if it was days or weeks, but just such clarity came to me. I absolutely did believe in God.
Mm.
That was not up for question. My childhood mystical experience was still valid.
Yeah.
And since then, I've been much more comfortably questioning, rebuilding, taking things apart, helping other folk, because I've found that there are all sorts of things that I don't need to let go of. So one of the things that frustrates me about being a pathos writer is I sometimes read stuff and I think, where are you going with that? Like, not, don't think we need to build it would be wrong to build a new set of dogma
Yeah.
that everyone has to reach the same conclusions. But at the same time, there are some things that, yeah, I'm not so sure about.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable, and I wouldn't encourage anyone to go down that road.
Mm.
Um, so, for me, the key to deconstructing and reconstructing safely has been to do it mystically, to take every step in the presence of God, in the company of God, talking with God, and God is communicative. And there have been plenty of times he said, "No, don't bother with that."
Yeah.
And other times he said, and again, it's my journey. It's my journey. And I know people get uncomfortable with folks saying things like God said, but it's my mystical experience that he communicates. So I'm not
Yeah.
going to be ashamed of that. And I found that walking that way has kept me safe most of the time. I've made some mistakes. There are sometimes I went off on my own little path. Yeah. And so you don't have to progress in all areas. There are areas where you can just keep the great stuff.
Yeah.
You know, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But there are areas to progress in, and I just comfortably do that in the company of God.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many things in your story that, like, a lot of light bulbs for me, I think that we align with in our journey, because it wasn't really until maybe even like a year ago when I realized, because I used to think like, okay, like I began deconstructing when I was like 36, or whatever. But then I started to think back to like my childhood and different seeds that were planted where the deconstruction began. Because like you said, we start deconstructing really for most of us from the very beginning. And I can remember I was in the fourth grade and I had just moved, my parents moved me from a public school to a private Christian school. So I'm in this private Christian school on this huge piece of property where they have a church. They have a Bible house, which is like a bookstore where you can go to buy all books that have been approved by the pastor. So it's like this mini like cult cultish kind of place. And so I go there and we have Bible class, every day, and we have chapel services on Thursday. And so this is like my first like real exposure to the Bible on like a consistent basis. And I can remember just a few weeks in because my parents, I moved there, I think in the middle of the year, the school year. I don't remember why, but I remember it was like the middle of the school year, just making friends, listening to this teacher talk about this book. And I remember thinking to myself, this book seems way more interesting than she's making it out to be because she was treating it like almost like a science book, right? Like it was she was talking about I remember talking about the book of Genesis and how
Right.
the earth is 6,000 years old and how the flood came and we have all this different evidence for all these different things. And I remember thinking to myself like they're telling me this book is like thousands and thousands of years old and yet it's still on our shelves today and we're sitting in this room learning about it. It seems way more interesting than a science book, but that was like I feel like that was like one of the first seeds that was planted like way, way, way back when because I grew up, 5th, 6th, 7th, all the way through 12th grade in that school. Then I went to Bible college, seminary, and many times I treated the Bible just like I was taught to treat it in that 4th grade classroom. But yet that
Yeah,
seed was still in there starting to grow because I can remember even in Bible college, seminary, coming across people who treated the Bible in that way, having that same thought that I feel like this just doesn't, there's got to be more to it than this. And then take that into the Jesus story, Jesus, this grand story of Jesus, and the virgin birth and dying on the cross to save us from his angry dad. Like, that seems like there's got to be more, there's got to be more to the story than that. It seems like the story is way more interesting than that being the grand purpose of it. So I think all that to say, I think it's important for people who, especially who are deconstructing, to maybe look back on their life and to see if they can pinpoint some of those seeds that might have been planted along the way where they had a doubt, they had a
mm,
question. They had a, I don't know if that's really right, but they went along with it anyway. Because, like you said, you're told to be the good Christian soldier and don't ask the questions and just
yeah.
have more faith and just believe and everything's going to be okay. But I think for me, and obviously, like you said, for you, we've come to see those seeds that have been planted. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think actually there's a lot of harm in treating the Bible the way that you were taught to treat it,
Hmm.
and I was taught to treat it. I've done my circuits as a preacher when I was younger, and I taught it in exactly that way. Um, there's so much harm because we're telling young people and older people this book here, this wonderful anthology of poetry and wisdom and philosophy and gospels and letters, prophecy, and all the rest of it, that we're not allowed to actually take it on its own terms. We're not allowed to engage with it as it was written.
Yeah.
We have to see it as this kind of flat two-dimensional text. And the confusion that that leads to, where people they read one passage and it says, God is love, and they read another passage and it's about there's a passage I read the other day, and there's a woman who gets abused by men, and then her family give her up to be abused, and then she gets chopped into pieces and sent all over Israel. I mean, there's so much confusion, and that comes from treating the Bible as this flat literal text,
Yeah.
where every part of it has to be interpreted in exactly the same way. And actually, nobody does that.
Yeah.
Like the church I grew up in, when I was very little, the women had to wear hats, or at least most of them did. Most of them chose to do so, and they couldn't say a word.
Hmm.
And then maybe 5, 10 years later, women were allowed to stand up in the communion service where you could stand up and say something, to ask for a hymn to be sung.
Yeah.
And they could read from the Bible. They couldn't then say anything about it because that was considered teaching.
Hmm.
But the congregation was deconstructing before my eyes, even if they didn't get very far.
Right. Even if they wouldn't call it that, that's what they were doing.
They had a go. And
Yeah.
still terrible that the vast majority of churches I've been to, women are treated as second-class citizens, and that's so utterly crystal clear to me.
Yeah.
Once you've seen that, you can't go back on it. It's impossible. But when we don't give people the freedom to read the Bible as something that was written in different cultures over thousands of years,
Yeah.
to think for themselves, then all of a sudden you just throw all believers into confusion, and they're all just burying their heads in the sand and ignoring the terrible pain of cognitive dissonance, because their heart knows that they can't believe that.
Yeah.
Their head is telling them you have to believe that.
Yeah.
That's just agony.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my biggest, I think, wake up moments, and I just shared this on the podcast a few conversations ago. I don't remember with who, but when it came to the whole topic of LGBTQ people, because again, growing up in the setting I was in, and probably you were in as well, we had our six clobber verses that told us, why these people are evil and why they're going to hell. And, I hate saying this, but this is what I was told, they're all pedophiles, like all these different things. That's just the mentality I grew up with. And I didn't know anybody until I was out of college and I was in seminary. I didn't know anybody who was gay. Like I never met a gay person. Now, I know now there are probably some closeted gay people who I met because they couldn't come out, but
Yeah,
I didn't know anybody who was outwardly gay. And so all I had in my mind was this picture of what I thought, these people were like. And so I went to pastor church and then I left the church for a whole bunch of reasons, which could be a whole podcast in itself. But I went to work for the Apple store and I worked there for 11 years. I was there. So I was there for a long time. I can remember my first day there, the person who's going to be training me was gay. And his boyfriend, worked in the store and they were a couple, obviously. And then the person who was next to me, who had a locker next to me, she was a lesbian. And then there were people there who were transgender, and my mind was blown. Now I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, like, I have to tell these people about the six verses, like that's like what's going in my mind because that's just what I was told. And then I started to become friends with these people and I started to hear their stories. And over the course of weeks and months and then years, like I saw them cry. I even saw them reading their Bible sometimes at the break room table, and I heard them talk about their church experiences, and I thought to myself, like, wait a minute, this is really weird. And then
yeah,
the big moment for me was when our managers had a meeting in the morning because we had a person in the store was transgender, and they said this person's going to be out for a few weeks, and when they return, they'll have a different name and new pronouns. And I thought to
right,
myself, wow, like this person is a really good friend of mine. And I love
yeah,
this person. They've been so good to me. And I had this make theological explosion. I went home, I said to my wife, I'm like, I don't know what to do with these six Bible verses. I mean, I haven't thought this through at all. But all I can tell you is that like these people that we've been told about are not the way that we've been told about them. And I
yeah,
said, if the Bible really teaches that, I said, the Bible's got to be wrong. I said that, which then means we have to rethink what the whole Bible is, because that's a whole nother, because it's not the inerrant book, then this perfect, infallible, inerrant book that we've been told that it
yeah,
is. And that was just a really big moment for me. But what I've come to realize is that it's like you said before, it's about the experience, right? Like I couldn't have come to that conclusion by just reading a book. I couldn't have
yeah,
come to the conclusion that gay people are not what I've been told by reading a book that presented a different view than the one I've been taught. Like I had to have an experience with people who are gay, and it was that proximity to those people and the friendships I built that led my heart to say, no, like this isn't right. Even though my brain was still saying it has to be right because look what it says. My heart was saying, we've got to shut up, brain. we've got to rethink some different things here. So I think that's a huge point.
I think it's also difficult. It's in that time to choose the heart. That's the
Yeah,
big, because it's a big choice to say I'm now going to override everything I've been told
that's right.
and I believe, and that's been part of the foundation of my mind, my whole life. And
Yep.
because my heart is telling me I'm wrong, and it takes courage to do that.
Yep. That's a scary thing because I mean because like in my mind I knew like okay, if I go down this road, especially if I'm vocal about it and I let people know that this is what I'm thinking, like there's a lot of people are gonna be really upset. Starting at like the church level with, leadership people to church people just in the pews to, I was in seminary, so, professors and deans and fellow students, all these different, like there's gonna be a lot of people who are gonna question
Yeah,
me because I'm questioning this. And so Granted, I kept it quiet for a long time. Like, I didn't really know what to do with what I was feeling, so I think I was very my attitude towards gay people changed, and I never brought up those clobber verses with my friends, of course. I never had those kinds of conversations. But I was very nervous to kind of share my evolving thoughts with my small circle of people because a couple of times I posed a thought and I got like major pushback, so it just kind of shut me down, and I didn't really have a lot of that courage to speak out about it until later on when I left seminary. I was still in seminary, very end of seminary, and I started this podcast and things like that. That I have the find the courage to kind of voice my thoughts. But like you said, it's a scary thing. It's not easy. It takes a step of faith, so to speak, to to start talking about the things that you're questioning and to listen to your heart versus your brain.
I love to say, well done.
Yeah, that's right. The other thing too that, I think was really that you're talking about is I think a lot of people have had, the struggle with hell and all that kind of stuff. Because I feel like when you can't see the harm, similar to what the LGBTQ thing, you can't see the harm that hell causes until you kind of have that experience for yourself. Because again, I've had conversations with people where I've shared with them who are still very evangelical, very conservative, very fundamentalist in their thoughts around these specific doctrines. And I've said, like, how can you be okay with following a God who's literally, you can phrase it however you want to, but tossing people into like burning fire for all of eternity? That doesn't make any sense. Well, they're like, well, that's what the Bible says. I'm like, I know the different passages you're referring to, but I feel like, again, like, how can you be okay with following a God who allows these kinds of things to happen? Like, there's this mental disconnect, but they haven't had that light bulb go off, because for me, the light bulb went off and I couldn't shut it off. I was like, I can't. It was for me, it was when my daughter was born, was the big light bulb, and she reached out for the first time, grabbed my hand, she was in the NICU, and I thought to myself, like, how I feel nothing but love for this child. This child could grow up and punch me in the face and do whatever, and I would still love her. I could never think of a situation where I would ever want to toss her into a fire. Like, how could this good God that we sing about in church be this good God? How could he be such a monster? If I think I'm so much I feel like I've got so much more love for this child. It doesn't make any sense to me, but like I can't when I share that with people, sometimes they just don't get it, but they haven't had the light bulb go off.
No, but yes, I completely agree with you. I think another issue that is very harmful, especially in relation to children, um, is sin. Uh, when we tell kids that they're sinners, that their righteousness is as filthy rags, children then sort of look at that on an intellectual level and go, "Oh, well, I accept that as a theological position," which is the argument that's used to defend it. Well, it's a theological position to
Yeah.
emphasize our need for God. But children don't hear that. They hear, "I'm awful."
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, the whole kind of I knew a couple of guys at university, and everyone thought they were the most spiritual guys, and they were really nice people.
Yeah.
But they thought they were doing each other a favor by calling each other dirty, rotten sinner.
Mm.
They wouldn't call each other by name. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure they did in their relaxed moments, but in public, in gatherings, they would call each other dirty, rotten sinner, and thought they were doing themselves a favor. And one time I confronted someone in my life who'd caused me immense pain, and their excuse was, "Well, I'm a sinner." It's like, no, don't theologize it. Don't blame sin. You did it.
Yeah.
The whole sin thing is once you start unpicking, you unpick everything.
That's right.
And for me, sin, I've given that a lot of thought. And for me, the definition I can accept, because of course, I believe it's a thing, and that it needs dealing with in some way, not paying for through penal substitution, but dealing with through healing and reconciliation. I see sin as anything that harms either myself or other people.
Yeah.
And that's a very simple one to stick with, like I
Yeah.
can't think of anything someone would call sin that is actually, harmful, that doesn't fit within that definition, really.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
means that when you want to grow and you want to change, instead of feeling bad about yourself,
Mm-hmm.
it's just being called forward by God into more freedom. It's like the whole thing can be this wonderful, liberating path.
Yeah.
We've made it this burdensome, uh, self-condemning experience.
Yeah. I think a lot of these theologies and all of these understandings and these doctrines, in a way, I think we have to have, especially if you're in deconstruction and you're rethinking some of these things, you almost have to like exercise these things out of your life, almost, like in
Yeah.
like a spiritual way, like have an exorcism, so to speak, where you cast these things out of your life, out of your mind, out of your heart. And I came to this realization. I talked to yesterday. I recorded with somebody who she calls herself a sorceress and a magician. She's Jewish. She was raised Jewish, and she said, she had some very harsh things to say about Christianity because she
Mm.
told me about some history and some different things conclusions she's come to. And she said, I think that Christians who are rethinking things need to exercise, meaning exorcism, exercise Jesus, the Bible, the doctrines, and everything else out of their life. And she said, you might come to a place where after you've been apart from those things for a little while, you want to invite them back in. You might
Mm.
invite Jesus, so to speak, back into your life. Should if I'm reading the Bible correctly, that's his thing. He's never gonna just go away. He's always welcome. He's always gonna take you back or come back, whatever. But she said, because a lot of times the things that we have the Bible in our life, we have Jesus in our life. She goes, it's not, you don't have those things in your life. You have what you've been told about those things in your life. And that was a huge aha moment for me. And looking back over my life, I see that very much being the case because I told her, like, I went like 6 months without reading my Bible, maybe like 4 years ago, because I couldn't read it apart from the narrative that I was given. And so I put it away. And I told myself I'm only going to pick it back up again when I want to pick it up again. And so when I picked it back up again, I started to see it much different.
Yeah.
Thankfully for this podcast, I mean, I've had so many people on who are scholars and thinkers and all these different things. I was able to start to read it again from a much different perspective. But I cast it out of my life for a little while, but then I brought it back in, but on a much
Mm.
different basis, and I started to see it more for what it is, as opposed to what
Mm.
I was told that it was, this inerrant, perfect, word of God document that God has handed to people and expects us to use it to run our lives. And so then I thought to myself, well, I guess the same could be true of Jesus. And I think that's true because I had this experience in seminary where I'm sure you're familiar with the term inner healing, like inner healing prayer. We had this class in school called soul care, and we had to basically share a whole life story with a small group of people. And then the professor led us through a time of prayer where he would pray and ask Jesus to show us where he was during different traumatizing moments of our lives,
Mm.
and in an effort to bring some healing to those memories. And there was this one particular memory where he was praying me through it, and he asked Jesus, show Glenn where you were in the room at this moment. And I saw him, and I was overcome with this immense amount of love. It was like this dream vision type thing. I don't know what it was. People would think I'm crazy, but whatever. This happened to me. And I thought to myself, the Jesus that I'm experiencing in this moment is not the Jesus I was told about
Mm.
in this very building, this very seminary building, Bible
Mm.
college, school. Like, I'm experiencing a much different
Mm.
presence of the Christ.
Yeah.
And I think going back to this woman's point that she made to me on the podcast, there's a point where I really think I need to exercise Jesus out of my life so that I can separate and understand the difference between what I was told about Jesus and
Mm.
who Jesus really is, and to kind of invite the
Mm.
Christ to come back and say, I want to know you for who you really are, not just for what I've been told that you are. And I think that I think there's something powerful in there to be had, and I'm still toying with it because this is a new concept for me. But I don't know.
Mm.
Respond.
Yes, I take the point. I think that especially if your version of Jesus um, is not as loving as the actual mystical interaction with Jesus. But I've mentioned mysticism several times, so I don't think you're crazy. That's the kind of thing I
That's going to be
experience.
our next conversation, by the way, for our
Yeah,
listeners. Duncan's coming back. We're gonna have more conversations.
be an interesting one. Might be anyway. Um, uh, I think it's that for me. I didn't need to do what you just described, sort of moving away from Jesus for a time, because
Yeah.
the mystical. I had emphasized the mystical experience of Jesus and really worked. I mean, because I was miserable. You see, as a younger man, I was deeply depressed, and um, my heart was empty. So I spent years seeking this experience. Now, when I say seeking, I don't mean that there's this thing, isn't there, where people say, and they're correct, that God is always with you, and you don't need to seek or ask for something new. And I agree with that, but I think there's also an unpacking of the gifts that He's already given us that are within us, and exploring and an immersion into them. And that's kind of an organic journey too. So I'm not saying I got something new, but I discovered that wonderful love of Jesus, the authentic experience of the love of Jesus, many years before I got to the point of picking my faith to pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So that for me, it was the experience of Jesus, the knowledge of His love, that has helped me through the deconstruction and reconstruction process.
Yeah.
So I take the point entirely, but I didn't need to do that bit. In fact, I found that Jesus was my anchor. But that I am a particularly mystical person in the sense that I only know one other individual who, when I talk with them, what they say about their experience feels so exactly similar to mine.
Yeah.
So it's difficult sometimes to communicate what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But I take the point that I had to put the Bible away too.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible I had to put aside, but I never did. I never put aside Jesus personally.
Yeah, and I don't think, I mean, it's, and that's the thing, like I don't think for me that that's something I would ever feel the need to do. Maybe take a break from
Yeah,
Jesus. Maybe like, Jesus is not gonna chat with you for a little bit. I need some space, I just need a little bit of time, whatever. But I think the point is I think everybody's journey is different. And I think that's, like
yeah.
she brought up a really beautiful point in our conversation, that some people might need to have that complete separation from Jesus forever or for a while because the trauma that they've experienced is so deep and they're having such a difficult time just coming to grips with understanding who they are apart from this, let's just face it, monstrous God that they've been painted. So, they just might need that complete separation. Other people might be able to rethink some things without kind of letting go of everything else. But I think the point is with deconstruction, everybody's journey is different, right? There's no script, there's no prescription, and there ought not to be any gatekeepers, for deconstruction because you can't tell somebody you're doing it wrong because there really isn't any right way to do it because everybody's situation and everybody's experience and the background that we all come from is so vastly different. And so that's going to lead us to this deconstruction process. And it might look different. Like I have so many people who have listened to the podcast who have told me, you know, tons of different stories and the way that those stories have led them now to interact with their faith. And some people are agnostic, some people are atheists, some people are now exploring Buddhism, some people are doing all sorts of some people are taking Jesus with them into all these different places because they just don't know what to do with it all. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that everybody's journey is different. And I think that we can just support each other and applaud each other on the way and just be shoulders for each other to lean on in the process.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It would be wrong to establish a new dogma that everybody
Isn't that what
has.
we're trying to escape? Right?
Yeah, exactly. We'd be doing the exact same thing. I think there are commonalities that probably most people going through a deconstructive process
Sure.
will go through, such as their relationship with the Bible and their
Yep.
relationship with the image of God presented in the Old Testament and sometimes in the New. I think there are commonalities. I think people will often question what they've been taught about sex and sexuality. But you're right, every journey is completely organic. And if we try and control it all, then we're not really trusting that God is involved.
That's right. That's right. Well, hey, Duncan, we're just about out of time, but this has been lots of fun. And like we said, we'll be continuing our conversation because you'll be joining us again in a couple of weeks to talk about mysticism. And we have some other things lined up later on for that. So we have a whole bunch of conversations with Duncan. We have to think of like a series name for this, like Duncan takes us to something. I don't know. some kind of name, because we have a lot of conversations lined up.
Yes. Well, thank you
Awesome.
so much for inviting me on.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. And real quick, where can people go to find you online? What's your Pathos blog called? Where can people go?
So it's probably best just to put my name in. I think I've called it. What did I call it now? I actually can't remember. I can't remember
It's all right.
blog.
I'll find it.
I've written nearly 500,000 words.
It's all good.
People are very welcome to connect with me on Facebook. I use my public page. My friend's page as a public page as well.
Okay.
Although be aware, I do post a lot of very stupid things, jokes about toilets. As
I think they're funny.
I have Crohn's disease, so it's a subject of humor. It's a humorous subject for me. Sometimes politics as well. But people are very welcome to connect with me there. And I'm also taking on. I'm a coach. I didn't mention that earlier, but I've been a coach for years. I used to be a life coach. In the end, I stopped doing that because I thought it's a bit broad, isn't it? What do you help people with? Life. Really, it's better to have a niche.
Right.
But I do coach people through deconstruction, and people are welcome to get in touch through a message if they want to through Facebook, and we can discuss that.
Awesome. I'll put the links in the show notes, and I'll see you soon.
Cheers, mate.